Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Anacortes City Council meeting of March 13th, 2023. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Franciak, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Cutter.
Present.
Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Walters.
Here.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick.
Here.
Thank you.
Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? All right, we're already on to item number 3, announcements and committee reports, and I don't have any announcements except I'm glad to see everybody made it because we are in daylight savings time now, and everyone's here on time, so that's great. So I'll just roll on to the next committee report, which I have Finance Committee.
Mayor Miller?
Oh, Mr. Young.
No. Okay.
You got it, Mr. Young.
Mayor Miller, it was Mr. Walters, myself, Mr. Hash, Mr. McDougall, as well as, of course, city staff. And the main discussions items, it was a short meeting, was a long-term refund of a city mistake. And the mistake was one that wasn't necessarily caught. It had gone on for a bit of time, not by the customer itself until later on. And so we discussed giving a refund and how much of that refund it would be. And part of the reason for that was within the city discussion, there's generally a limit, but the city also felt that because it was a mutual error that the city didn't catch it and that steps were taken later on to prevent this same type of error from happening again, that a full refund may be warranted at this point. So we discussed that.
And specifically, the mistake was we billed for too many garbage cans. One customer.
Thank you, Mr. Walters. He was paying attention too. Just kidding. Also, we discussed meeting times. I think originally when the time was set, it was set for a variety of different reasons and commitments. And so the meeting times is now, I believe, confirmed for 4 p.m. So we're going to move it up just a little bit such that when it also allows for other committees that are meeting at, let's say, 5 o'clock, and just trying to make sure that there's no conflicts. Let's see. There's also some discussion that about financing, some financing for some of the initiatives by the city itself. And at one point, the thought was that long-term interest rates would be lower than short-term interest rates. And that seemed the direction that it was going for a while. But given the announcements by the Fed more recently that the rate increases will continue, the finance department and the team decided to take another look at our approach to some things we were considering financing on behalf of the city. And so we discussed those things. Let's see. Also, we did have a small discussion about the potential discount program for city services. I'm sure that'll be coming up at some point we're going to have tonight. And so, but it's a great discussion of trying to figure out how do we help those that could least afford some of the services to be able to better take advantage of the programs that we already offer and making sure that it's public. Well, it's been public, but the thing was that sometimes people are not aware of additional programs that the city offers. And so there was a strategy discussed to how do we further get that information out, how in considering the programs that we're looking at for the discount, how do we make that more equitable for all and fair for all? Anything you want to add, Mr. Walters or Mr. McDougall? All right, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Next up is the Public Safety Committee report, and Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes. We had a public safety meeting on March 7th. Mayor Miller, Chief Harris, and Chief Floyd were all there. We also had one member from the public, which was great and a good addition. The police department is working on their UAV program, which is the Unmanned Aerial Vehicle, which is a drone program. They're in the next stage. They're doing pilot training with Skagit, so that's at no cost for the Anacortes. They're working on department policy for some is being drafted, and then we're also, I think, trying to get someone from the fire department to also do the training, so that there's both departments are able to utilize that resource. We've decided, Chief Floyd's decided to participate in the crisis negotiation team, which is a countywide team. He's got one officer who's going to start training. And so it has representatives from a number of the municipalities and the county. So we're actually going to host the training in Anacortes this month. It's a really good regional resource. So if there's some major crisis, we've got training in place and the resources in place to take advantage of it. It's usually deployed about 6 to 10 times per year. And they just have regular training. So it's a pretty important program there, and they know how to work together, whether it's kind of doing research on the spot, whether it's talking to folks and kind of figuring out how to neutralize the situation. The accreditation assessment's gone well. We've had 5 vacant positions. For patrol officers, we've got 4 really good candidates that are going through the process, so we're pretty pleased about that. One of the big challenges is that once we've identified a potential candidate, they've got to then go through the academy, and the academy has quite a long wait time. It can be up to 5 months. So Chief Floyd has been working with the 5 northern counties about trying to establish a regional training facility at Skagit Valley College, which is a pretty exciting thing. They've got extra space there, and the college is willing to partner with the regional training facility, and then this would allow local officers at the top of their profession to be able to then go and train people. It would also then kind of cut down on the wait list that's over 200 folks long right now. They could probably do about 3 sessions per year, which would then be about 90 police officers through the program. It just makes it easier for police officers too, versus having to drive all the way down to King County. So it's a kind of a unique opportunity that's coming together, and so we're pleased that Chief Floyd is taking a lead on that. Chief Harris, he's working on finding some more grant opportunities for their coordinated outreach program. Looking at options there. The recruitment academy went well. There's about 6 to 7 volunteer firefighters that are going through that process. And the big exciting news is that the brush truck should be ready by May for wildland training, which happens every May. So I think that's pretty exciting that creative solution seems to be working out, and should be in working order by the summertime.
Thank you. Next up is Port City Liaison Committee, and due to a number of factors, there weren't any council members able to attend, but I was there, and I'll do my best to report out. Probably the big news from the port is Sean Ottenbright, if I pronounce that correctly, is now the District 3 Port Commissioner, taking over for Joe Verdos, who resigned for health reasons. And the little on the background of Sean is Salish Boat Company and Northwest franchise of the Freedom Boat Club. So he is definitely a tenant of the port. The major port issues, TDOC, of course, is their major project, working on commercial pump outs for larger vessels, shore to ship power, basically meaning so some of the larger vessels can turn their generators off so they're not operating their diesels to operate the generators. North Basin project, which is primarily the RV park, which means they're not going to be available for camping this summer because that's going to start this summer. And they are looking forward to helping the city and helping themselves when the Port Transit Shed closes its doors for events at the end of this year to help the city with the solution that might be something like a depot pavilion. So that's my best attempt at the Port City Liaison Report. Next up is the Housing Affordability and Community Services Committee report.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
On Thursday, our committee met with Mr. Hoagland, and we took another review of the utility discount program ordinance that we had put together, finalized a draft, and that's on the agenda for tonight, although the draft is not in the packet. But I had sent it out to council on Sunday. Hopefully, most of you were able to open that link and review it. Tonight is only a first read, but we didn't finish the review with Mr. Hoagland until Thursday, so I didn't make it into the packet the night before. We also met at the invitation of the Family Center about developing our homeless housing plan for the city of Anacortes. Under state law, that is a county responsibility, and they have developed one. But state law allows the city to also develop its own. And if we were to choose to do that, we would be eligible to receive funding for implementation of a homeless housing plan. So we have taken the County Homeless Housing Task Force recommendations from a number of years ago. Ms. Moulton served on that committee and put them into a draft. And so we'll start looking at what we could do here in terms of a plan specifically for Anacortes, with potentially some different recommendations than what the county implemented in its plan. And we'll be back in the future with more on that.
Thank you. Next up is Planning Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. The Planning Committee met just prior to this meeting. It was Ms. Cleland McGrath, Mr. Walters, and staff, and myself, and we had some guests today from the Anacortes Downtown Association, which that's not the exact name, but you know what I mean. They are working to do some initial sort of beautification projects in town, and their number one first project is to improve the arch at 10th Street going into Old Town. The lights have burnt out on that, and it needs a little refresh. So they have some great ideas and initiative to do that. Another thing they brought forward were some ideas for traffic calming in the intersection of Commercial Avenue and 10th Street. And the larger idea being to transition from a car-centric zone to a pedestrian-centric zone in Old Town, and to just calm traffic. And one of the ways to do this, they've done in other communities, is to do painted curb bulb outs, so something really artsy that just helps people slow down, and with some little barriers potentially so that people can feel safer crossing. So it's a traffic calming measure light, I would say. It's like a pilot project to see how that would work, and to just calm and slow and also beautify that landscape a little bit, the asphalt landscape. So that was really interesting. They seem to have a lot of really good energy. We met their executive director, Jordan, and she has some great ideas, and looking forward to hearing more, because this will be a process. It's not a done deal at all. So they're working with the city engineers and other city staff to make sure that this could be with code, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, more to follow. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Any other announcements or committee reports? I guess I forgot to announce that last week we hosted the chamber here in City Hall and had a big turnout. I'm not sure why, because apparently I was the speaker, and delivered a State of the City address, and I think it's probably available somewhere online, but I expect to be delivering more of those in the future. And it ran a little bit long. But anyway, lots of good stuff, and it isn't about the work that I'm doing. It's about the work that council is doing, and that of and that was kind of the theme of the State of the City address, was the council and how that turns into the engine that is the city, which is the staff work. So anyway, that was enjoyed that, and we had a packed crowd. Okay, any other announcements or committee reports? All right, we're on to item number 4, which is public comment. This is an opportunity for any members of the public to address the council on anything that is not on our agenda tonight. And I didn't get anybody signed up, but you can, I like that enthusiasm. Come on up, but we try to sign them up, but we're going to make sure we hear your name and if you live in Anacortes, so state your name. And make sure the microphone's on. Blue light's a little square there, blue or green.
Green.
Okay.
Thank you. Bashi Morris, 1618 7th Street. I'm wondering, one, if there is a liaison with the county through the city council. And this is in regard to the Guimas Ferry. The rates are being increased by a full 71% and up to 100%. This was announced on the 28th of February, and comments were due by the 10th of March. So my concern is, because I do live on 7th and I'm a friend of Guimas and I let people park behind my house, this is the ongoing problem that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I didn't know if there was a liaison committee that is dealing with this with the county and how we are going to get ahead of the parking problem, because the ridership will definitely change at that fare rate increase. Is there a liaison?
Yeah, we definitely work with the county on a regular basis, but it's a good opportunity to educate the rest of the public that it is a county-operated ferry system,
Yes.
and we do understand some of the challenges that's going to create.
Right, thank you. And then I think last year, when Fred Buckenmeyer brought the proposal forward for the resident parking permit for 1.5 blocks on the south side of 6th Street, at that time, 2 neighbors, Warren Tesler and Luke Russell, both testified that they would be more than happy during crisis and ferry outages for those meters or those signs to be bagged so that people from Guimas could park there. This has not been done, and I'm wondering if there is a reason or if it can be done for the remainder of the week until March the 19th.
And March the 19th, when the haul out happens, or is
That's
complete.
when it ends.
Yep, when it's completed. Yep, thank you. We'll take a look at that. Appreciate
Okay.
it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else need to address the council, anything that's not on the agenda? Okay, come on up. Okay, well, we still got to get your name for the record.
Malcolm McCutcheon, 1613 7th Street, across the street from Bashi. Overlooking the stop sign at I and 7th, this is a part of Old Town that has no sidewalks. People have to walk in the street. When people are parked on both sides of the street, they're walking in the street. Half the people at that stop sign coming down 7th do not stop. And especially at night, the area lights in that neighborhood suck. And the first block and a half coming up from the ferry, you have 5 kids under the age of 7. And I think it's a safety issue. There seems to be, I read on Facebook the other day, a city vehicle running a stoplight, or stop sign rather. So it's a problem in the city, that especially in that area with no sidewalks, it's a safety issue. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Pearl, did I see you wanted to come on? Come on up. You still have to state your name in case I got it wrong or you changed it at some point.
Good evening, Mike Pearl, 1617 O Avenue, Anacortes, City Councilman and audience. A couple of things. One, I brought along a front page from Cedar Woolley paper. I'd like to give everybody a copy of this, if that's okay.
Sure.
And what it is a it's a picture of a project that's going
And
on in.
Mr. Pearl, you're going to have to talk in the microphone because
sorry.
there's.
Yeah, this is a front page of the Cedar Woolley paper, I believe. It says a construction boom continues in Cedar Woolley. It's August of, thank you, August of 2022, and it's a 5-story Gateway Village. They call it apartment complex. That's 65 units. If you go into Cedar Woolley, just before you get into Cedar Woolley, on the left side, there's a McDonald's. If you take a left right there, you'll see it. It's almost hidden by the trees on the west side of it. But according to what I understand is projected for the MJB property of 400 to 450 units, last I've heard. You could put 5 or 6 of these 5-story, 65-unit buildings in that property. I think 5-story is excessive for almost anything, but that's an opinion that's held by hundreds of people in town, but a lot of others that aren't. But it's a pretty interesting building to look at, and I imagine there's going to be more than one there when it's done. I want to restate my opposition to the 5-story apartment houses west of, I'd like to see them not built west of Commercial, but O Avenue seems to be in that zone of businesses and housing, that kind of mix. East of O Avenue, I think, is more suited for a lot of these multi-stories. Hopefully we can get them down to 4, but if they go to 5. The owner of the Fidalgo Flats last week said that they got the bonus height ordinance because they were required to have at least 25% of their units at 600 square feet, as though they would be affordable. He came in and said that they actually built 60% of their units at 600 square feet. So apparently it's not an economic disadvantage to build anything that small. I have yet to hear on what those prices are in those apartments. I think it would be constructive, either pro or con, and I don't know which way they are, for affordability. Oh, lost it. And I would encourage, there was a letter that Mary Jo McCardle sent last week that I would encourage the public all to read. I think it's in the records. And my final thing is a quote from, not sure who, where, but it said, you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Anybody else for anything that's not on the agenda? Okay, we will move on to our consent agenda, item 5, A, B, and C. Council?
Mayor Miller,
Mr. McDougall.
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. McDougall, a second by Mr. Young to approve consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. On to other business, item 6. First up is item 6A. This is Washington State Ferries Service Restoration Plan 2023 update, and going to have Ms. Shu introduce our guest.
Mayor, council members of the audience, tonight I'm pleased to introduce John Benzina. John is the Director of Planning, Customer, and Government Relations for Washington State Ferries, and he has graciously agreed to come speak to us tonight about the service restoration plan that was recently released. You probably have seen information on recent news about how this the biggest impact maybe to Anacortes is on the international ferry run. So I appreciate that Mr. Benzina is here to give an update from Washington State Ferries, and I know that we'll ask good questions and be very fair to Mr. Benzina, as he has a difficult job. So with that, I'll just bring up your presentation, and then you'll be able to just move through it.
And really appreciate you coming tonight, especially, and I know you're feeling a bit under the weather and coming up under not fun circumstances, but we do appreciate you communicating directly with the council and the community. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Emily. It's nice to see some of you for the first time. I've communicated with a lot of you by email, so thank you for this opportunity. And, I'd like to thank the mayor for his directness, but also his collaborative approach to a frustrating situation for all of us, and I look forward to working with all of you. So, as we came out of the pandemic last March, a year ago now, we started looking at service restoration. And we knew that we didn't want to wait until we had the crewing and the vessels available to restore everyone at the same time, that it needed to be a tiered approach. So as we looked at that, we looked at basically 4 metrics: ridership levels, accommodating the seasonal increase in summer peak ridership, obviously that you know all too well about here, our ability to recruit, hire, and train new employees and fill key positions. To that point, last year, for the fleet alone, we hired 202 new employees. We had 42 retirements, 99 people left for other reasons, so that gave us a net increase of 61 employees for the year for the fleet. So we're slowly building back. Before last year, we had been funded to hire people in the spring, train them, get them ready. They worked hard all summer, a lot of them on call. But then, and they got worked hard during the summer. They got all those hours filled and then more on overtime. But then when fall came and we went, you probably know we run 19 boats in the summer, 18 in the spring and shoulder fall seasons, and 17 in the winter. So, you know, there's not a lot of transportation dollars. Nobody wanted to fund us to keep those crew members year round. So those on-call folks, as we got into fall and winter, would get fewer and fewer calls. Some would ask to be laid off so that they could go get other jobs and come back in the spring. Others just went and found other jobs. I don't know about you, I couldn't not work for several months every year. Last year, the legislature funded us to keep those folks, to find other work that they could do, get them in training, get them doing other things with us. So we're not having that same cyclical thing, which is terrific. It means we're building back to where we were before. You know, I've been in this job 7 years, and probably for 6 of those years, the Secretary of Transportation, Roger Millar, the WSF Assistant Secretary, and I have talked about the silver tsunami coming for our most senior positions. Our licensed deck and engine room employees, 50 to 60% are eligible for retirement within 5 years. One of the most amazing and supportive things that the legislature did, led by your 3 legislators and the Ferry Caucus, was to pay people who aren't licensed, who in the past would have had to leave their families, work a full shift, and then do the training they need with the Coast Guard to become licensed deck officers. Now we take them out of the fleet and we pay them, thanks to funding from the legislature, for 8 weeks so that they get that training and then they can move up to those positions that we need so badly. It was really fun. In November, we graduated the first class, and I went, and I think there were 22 people in the class. I would say half said that they had had fits and starts. They had tried to do that training, and then their kids needed to go to soccer practice, or their wife was sick, or they just never got it done. But because we supported them this way, now they were able to get it done. They were super excited and appreciative. So we're building back that crewing we need. And then we also, the other thing we talked to the public about last year was once we got through this crewing piece, we definitely have a vessel availability issue. And I'll talk about that in a minute because I think that's most relevant to you all. So service restoration, we prioritize the routes, as I said, based on ridership and also need, like, alternate forms of travel. If you live in the San Juans, if you live on Vashon Island, you don't have any other way to get to where you're going. Whidbey, obviously an island, they can drive off the north end. And then, so we started with Anacortes, San Juan Islands, which I hope is good news for all of you, that folks coming through here and going to the ferry and using local businesses. That is 4 boats. Now, normally in the summer they would have 5 because of the Sydney boat. And that also it doesn't run in the winter, so it wouldn't be running right now. But in the summer, before it did its 2 round trips to Sydney, it did 1 domestic round trip to Lopez, and it also did domestic service around its 1 round trip to Sydney in the spring and fall. So, so right now we're running 4 boats up there instead of 5, which we'll talk about in a minute. So then, you'll see here, Seattle Bainbridge, Clinton, Mukilteo. I don't need to read you the list because you can all read. And when we had the crewing and the vessel availability, we trial a route for 3 weeks. Our normal reliability is 99%. Knowing that right now nothing is perfect, we've made that 95%. So if we can operate successfully a boat for at 95% reliability for 3 weeks. And just to get further in the weeds, our staffing goes in 2-week cycles. So we actually make the week 2, all those on-call people have been called in week 1 and maybe are less needing hours. So we always make sure there's 2 week 2s in that 3-week cycle. So we know, okay, we're good to move on. So where are we? Anacortes San Juan's, even before last March, before we released the plan, we restored the service on that route in January 2022. Shortly after that, we restored Seattle Bainbridge. You may remember in October of 2021, we had drastically reduced as we saw retirements, the vaccine mandate, as we came out of, the thing that I've been talking about with my colleagues for years about these people can retire, they retired. And then we had the Omicron and the Delta variants, which just wiped out our crewing availability. And we knew that, what we heard from the public was, you can have less service, just make it reliable. Have one boat, but let me know the boat's going to be there. So in October 2021, we did that, and this is building back from that program. So as of last month, we've restored 4 of our 8 routes. So with the restoration of Edmonds-Kingston, just today, we started a little bit of extra service on the Fauntleroy-Vashon Southworth Triangle route. We hope to get them going. That's actually a vessel availability problem. One of the boats that works on that route had an elision, which is less than a collision, last year, which has taken it out of service since last summer. So we now have it back, and we're doing its Coast Guard required work before we can put it back into service, but we hope to have that back in service soon. And then unfortunately for crewing issues, and again, these licensed deck officers and licensed engine room, it takes a long time for folks to be qualified. We don't think we'll have the crewing available to restore service on the Bremerton route until the fall. They've actually been on one boat service, meaning 2.5-hour waits between sailings since September of 2021. So at the end of September, probably when we get to the fall schedule, we will start trialing them, but they will have been on one boat service for 2 years. And then Port Townsend Coupeville, who has 2 boats service, sort of late spring, summer, early fall. They've been on one boat service since COVID began, and we don't think we'll have the crewing available to get them started and trialed until next spring. And then last but certainly not least, in the end of our hearts, is the Sydney run, which I'll talk about more in a minute. But obviously, I know how important it is to you and to your economy. It's certainly important to us, but it's hard to argue restoring international visitor service when there are people who are trying to get back and forth to work, back and forth to chemotherapy appointments, other essential travel. So vessel availability. As I was just saying, we have 21 boats in our fleet. 4 years ago, we had 24. We retired 3 of those. And so with needing 19 boats to run our regular summer service, having 21, 2 always have to be available for maintenance and preservation work. There simply isn't enough shipyard availability or time in the calendar with 21 boats to operate all of them all year round. We've got to have those summer months to do work on them as well. So with 21 boats, 2 out. If you have 19, obviously you're right at that level. And as we've seen with a couple of boats that are out unexpectedly, as our boats get older, 11 of those 21 boats are more than 40 years old, and 5 of those 11 are more than 50 years old. The Tillicum that's working in the inner island, I joke, although it's not funny, and it's also true, it's the only thing in Washington older than me. It's 64 years old and doing its work up there. We have been directed by the legislature to keep our boats running for 60 years, so it's already far over that. The Yakima, the Tillicum, and the Cleeton, the long-range plan we did and turned into the legislature in 2018, 2019 said that they should be retired in the next 3 years. But obviously, it's not tenable to go from 21 to 18 boats because then there's no chance of even running basic service. So the governor requested, and I think the legislature next month will fund giving those boats the work they need to keep them into service until we start getting new boats. Additionally, our 3 largest boats, the Jumbo Mark II vessels, they are up for their 20-year propulsion upgrade. So those 3 boats of our 21 they burn 26% of our diesel fuel, so they're also pumping out 26% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Because we're now going to build hybrid electric vessels, the decision was made to convert those, because they have to have this work done anyway, to convert those to hybrid. So we'll be taking out 26% of our fuel use, more importantly, 26% of the greenhouse gas pollutants that we're putting out in the atmosphere. But to get that work done, starting in September this year, one of those boats will be out for 9 months a year for the next 3 years. So we'll have them in the summer when we really need them, but that goes into the vessel availability issue that we're talking about. So, and then you probably know that for an international boat, and this is something that, you know, we're directed by the Coast Guard, but something that we talk to them about, you need a soulless boat. One of my colleagues was asked by a reporter if this meant that boats had souls. It is not that, although we think they do. This is safety of life at sea. So we had 2 of those. The Elwha was retired a few years ago, you may remember, because it had not got midlife preservation work done on its steel. We put in several $1 million of new steel, and then it turned out it needed $20 million yet more. And the governor in his budget, you know, understanding the need for it, but also the competing need for dollars, we decided to retire that boat. The legislature went along with that, although I will say your 3 legislators were not happy about that decision and fought for it, but transportation dollars are hard to come by. So with only the Chelan currently available to do that route, and it's, you know, it's getting older. It's supposed to be retired in 2036. And now, and I can go into that if you have questions about it, but we now expect our first new boat to come in 2027. So as we get those new boats, we retire an older boat. So in 27, 28, 29, we'll get new boats. We'll retire those 3 boats I was just talking about. So we don't really get ahead until 2030. So, you know, challenging and frustrating for all of us. Before I take your questions, there are a couple things I want to point out because I hear different narratives. There is no lack of support or desire at WSF to operate this route. We are funded by the legislature to do it. We are funded for the crewing, for the vessel, and we cannot cancel a route on our own. Only the legislature and the governor can do that. So we will be, you know, as soon as we have the availability, we will begin operating the route again. The restoration plan we released on the 28th, where we updated the plan from last year, we said that we believe it'll be 2030 before we have that vessel availability again to restore the route. I think it's really important from my position that we are transparent and open with the public about that, but that we're also open about possibilities. Last week I talked to Senator Lovelet and to Representative Rammel, and I know that Representative Lekanoff agrees. They asked us to look at alternatives, to think outside the box and think creatively, to be very open to things. I have a sneaking suspicion that the legislature will give us some language directing us to be creative and look at those things. So on that positive note, we have looked in the past at domestic boats that we can maybe lease to fill in till we have the capacity to do it. We haven't found a domestic boat that works, but we're going to look at that again. And then if you look at a foreign flag boat, the Jones Act comes into play. And a couple of possible constraints there. And again, we're going to look at this seriously and see if we can find one. We need one that works at our terminal and obviously at Sydney, that we can take those vehicles. So we're going to investigate that this year and see what we can do. The Coast Guard's understanding, I met with them last week, there's 2 things. One, if you operate a foreign flag boat, it can only go from one domestic port to one international port. So it couldn't stop in the San Juans, which would be challenging for them. May or may not have heard from people in San Juans that we could just port it there and not here. But you know, we'll be looking at those options and what we can do. The second thing the Coast Guard said is that it's their belief, and they're going to look in and confirm this for me, that if you operate a foreign flag boat, it has to be tied up in a foreign country. So it wouldn't be an Anacortes boat going to Sydney, it would be a Sydney boat going to Anacortes, which doesn't probably matter as much except for crewing, obviously. We have to have somewhere for our crew members to stay. So we're going to take a look at that this year. Without any defensiveness or lack of wanting that to work, we're going to see what we can do to get this back. Realistically, if we tell the legislature that before their next session, if we find one, which I hope we do, we would then ask the legislature to fund the lease of that. We'd have to sign a contract with the owner, train our crews to operate it unless there was some way to work a deal. But I think that's the most likely way that it would work. So we're probably looking at 2-year gap in service regardless, even if best case scenario, we can find something. Second point, there are folks with passenger-only boats who are very interested in this route, both coming from Anacortes and going from San Juan Island. So there's a gentleman who runs a tourism business on San Juan Island out of Roach Harbor. It would be fairly easy, and I think actually kind of fun. You could take our boat from here to Friday Harbor. There's transportation from Friday Harbor to Roach Harbor, jump on the boat, go to Sydney, where you could either stay, or there's public transportation between Sydney and Victoria as well. So, I've heard other private companies may be interested in jumping in this. We want to work with folks and be flexible and supportive, and not, we get not to the same level you do, but I've done the first sailing of the year. That's a cool route. And I know for you all, as you look at local business folks, you really need those people coming through. I didn't see quite as many campers at the casino outside Anacortes as I used to when people were lining up waiting for our first vessels in March. But we want to work with you and be a good partner. And I know that last week or 2 weeks ago was frustrating information. I may have heard it described as a gut punch. That's certainly not, Mayor. Certainly not the kind of partners that we hope to be. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, John. Council, any questions off the bat? Mr. Walters?
Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation, but also for your ongoing communication. It's very enlightening to receive your emails, and I especially appreciate the structured way in which you communicate with the Ferry Caucus and the ferry communities that are really critical to the ferry system as much as the ferry system is to them. My parents were both ferry workers. I spent more than one Christmas opening presents at the Anacortes Ferry Terminal. I appreciate the difficulty of staffing what is a 365-day operation. It's not unlike the similar difficulties we all face staffing the police and fire departments. But it has been over and over again proposed to eliminate the Sydney run in one venue or another. Most recently, there was this discussion or study of privatization of the Sydney run, and I color me suspicious for, being a little concerned that maybe there is some ulterior motive. And I know you've sort of already addressed that, but it does kind of sound like we're coming back around to the conclusion that, maybe a private operator could operate this run. I mean, private operators do make runs to Victoria, but not with cars. So, and a passenger boat operating out of Anacortes or out of Friday Harbor, I think would not really fill the gap that we will experience here. So I'm hoping you could address that. And then also, just for my edification, have we scrapped the Elwha? Have we lost the Elwha? Or is it in mothballs somewhere where it could be saved still?
First of all, thank you for spending Christmases at the Anacortes Terminal, which we hope to make nicer soon. The Elwha's sold. It's one of 3 vessels that's sold. I believe it's on its way to, or will be soon on its way to Ecuador. And, I hear a lot of people talk to us about the vessels, the Elwha, but also other vessels we've sold recently. We're competing for a tight resource of transportation dollars, and the amount of money that you would have to put into those vessels, and I think the mayor would be the first person to help me explain, it's cheaper than buying new ones. But the amount of work that would have to go into those, and it also, that takes shipyard time, then you're not doing maintenance and preservation on our other boats. So it's gone, but that's why when we looked at alternatives, that wasn't one of them. And then I want to thank you, council member, because I think I probably misspoke. We don't want to privatize this route. We're looking at stopgaps until we can be back. So if there are creative solutions we can come up with to fill that void, you know, I think that study that was done just before COVID did a really good job of explaining why this is an important state run. And I know not just here, but the folks in the San Juans really feel strongly that as part of the state highway system and as part of, you know, just basic state service and support, that this should be a state route.
Any other questions? And
Mayor Miller?
Mr. McDougall and then Ms. Moulton.
All right. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. You mentioned 3 boats being retired, and would you mind reminding me the other 2, and were they aged out? What was the circumstances, and could they be brought back?
So besides the Elwha, there were actually 3 others since 2016, the Hayu, the Hayak, and the Klahoya. And it was just that as we got the new Olympic class vessels, in the same way I talked about when we get the new hybrid electrics, we'll retire one, they were slated to be retired as we got new vessels. The Elwha was the one that was different and was not slated to, but it was because it hadn't got its midlife preservation work done.
So those other 3 that were retired, they were potentially in working condition. Have they been sold, or are they still mothballed somewhere?
Sold, and which is not easy to do because not just us, but others, there's just not a lot of good uses for them. I think the Hayu is currently on Lake Washington as a tiki bar, but I understand it's for sale again because it hasn't gone over well. So it takes an extraordinary amount of money to keep the vessels going once they get to a certain age, and we're seeing that with the 3 we need to keep going. But at some point, my colleagues who are engineers, which I am definitely not, just don't feel it's worth the money you're putting into it because it's going to keep breaking down as it gets older.
Okay. And the Solus upgrade, roughly like ballpark, what's the cost of that?
My understanding is, and we're going to do an analysis of whether it makes sense. So we're building 5 new Olympic class boats. The legislature funded us last year for $1 billion, which is great news because that's real money. And so there's lots of people interested in this. We're going to look at whether it makes sense to build a new, you know, slightly alter the design and make a new vessel Solus, or if it makes sense to take one of the Olympic classes we already have, because the Sydney route probably won't be electrified. It's farther, it's going to a foreign country, and does it make sense? And the last estimate I heard is it's probably about $20 million to retrofit an existing vessel to Solus.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation and all your regular communication over the air, as Mr. Walters said. And I also appreciate every time that I email you, you get right back to me. So thanks so much for that. And just thinking of the 3 that will be slated for retirement when the new ones come on, I mean, couldn't an extra year be eked out of each one of those, or is that just not a possibility? I'm sure you've looked at that.
Yeah, you know, it's legislative direction. I don't want to put the onus on them. We'll operate them. The Tillicum already being 64 and trying to get 3 more years out of it, that's going to be tough. And if you were talking to folks in the San Juans, they would already tell you that they don't feel it's reliable and that, you know, they're already frustrated with how often it's out of service. So those possibilities always exist. It's, as gas prices decline and other revenues to the transportation budget decline, and I was saying to a group earlier when I met with the Ferry Advisory Committee here, who's been super helpful and work hard, people in Wenatchee want bridges, people in Spokane want roads, people in Yakima want, we're competing with all those things. This is certainly part of our marine highway system, and it's important, and the legislature is really stepping up and giving us the support we need to get this done. But I think it's hard to make a case from others' perspectives to increase the size of the fleet to 22 or 23 vessels. And because then, of course, you have to crew them as well. So we're not just running 21 boats now, we have 21 boats worth of crew. And if you go to 22 or 23, you have to hire those crew members as well to make sure that they run reliably. So we're open to, to suggestions or how we're funded, but I think the legislature and the Transportation Committee is in a very difficult position with competing priorities around the state and how much funding is necessary to keep a state-run ferry system in service.
Okay, thank you for that. And then as far as the BC ferry service, could there be any collaboration with them? Do they have an extra boat that they could?
So we'll be
use
looking at that. I know they have some of the same crewing issues we do. Like they're tying up their boats. I know in Alaska they're not running a lot of their boats this summer because of crewing. So we'll work with, as we do this study this year, if there are BC ferries or Alaska ferries or others that we can use and we'll work here and at Sydney, we'll absolutely look into that. My understanding is a lot of the boats, other than ours, we have double-ended boats. And so a lot of other ferry systems are side loaders, so it doesn't necessarily line up. But, it'd be great if we found a double-ended one so we don't have to spin every time and, cars pull on one way and they have to get off. But, as I said, we want to be creative partners and work with the community to try to get some service back.
Okay, my last question, thank you. As far as the passenger-only service, I think that does help. So it's great that someone's doing it privately from Roach Harbor. Is that something that you could see WSF doing for passengers, bicycles? We get a lot of people that come through on bikes, and that would be a good option potentially.
So we're precluded by state law from running passenger-only service. That could change. But as of now, several years ago, the legislature changed the law so that we could only run vehicle ferries, not passenger only, which is why you see King County and Kitsap County, they went to their voters and asked them to support, not suggesting you do that, but they actually had to go to their own voters and ask to fund their county-run passenger-only ferries because we can't. And I do want to thank both of you. Sometimes I worry my emails are spam. I tend to send out, unfortunately, there's a lot to communicate about. Yeah. So I do appreciate, those of you who've said and those of you who've written to me before that those are helpful. I'll try not to increase the number you get.
Mr. Young.
Thank you. Again, I wanted to echo the sentiment of my fellow council members about your communication. It's always very informative. It keeps us up to date as to, what's happening, what the considerations are, what you're thinking. So it's really a great form of communication. So I really wanted to commend you on that. I've reached out to you a couple of times myself, and I appreciate your prompt response to it. And I know it's no secret, you can tell by the subtleness of the mayor and council of our desire to keep this run here and also do what we must in order to continue to make it an integral part of transportation here and out of Anacortes. So I really wanted to emphasize that. I know you know that. Tell us how we can help in this process. Again, our legislators representing us in this area have generally been extraordinary in the sense that they really get it. I think Senator Loveland was sat on this council before, so I know she understands and have been a big advocate, as well as Ms. Luckano, as well as Mr. Rambo and Congress, of course. But one of the things, too, is that in looking at the possibility of what could be done and the cost associated with it, the only thing being B school, I'm a B schooler myself, and, given that the Canadian, I think you were mentioning there were side loaders, sometimes too, I know you're going to think about it, but sometimes even making modifications, temporary modifications, or modifications that can allow in this stopgap period of time until we can get things done may be really cost effective for us and also keeps the run going. So those are things that I know you're going to consider, but I really kind of wanted to push the emphasis of looking outside of the box and thinking that maybe there are modifications that we can make and do in the short term to keep this run going. And again, and also echoing Mr. Walters' concern, is that about making sure that it stays here in Anacortes, because so much of what we do here in this city and the opportunity we have within this city as a small but wonderful city really is also tethered to traffic that comes through going to the ferry. I think it's part of our opportunity going forward under some of the initiatives the mayor and I have been talking about, and Economic Development Committee has been about how do we harness that 2 million people going through. And so, you know, it's a big part of what we want to do here, the vision forward for the city, how we get there. So, you know, our ask of you, as well as what we will ask of our legislators, is how we can help that process. It is crucial that we not lose any of it if we can. And so, and I know you know that, and I really appreciate what you've done, how you've said it, how you've presented this case before us today has been all very rational and very real. So I want to thank you for that part, but also challenge you to find a way, if you could. Thank you.
You know, if I could, just, Councilmember Young, thank you for that. And you know, it won't surprise those of you who know your legislative delegation. It's not an exaggeration to say they have me on speed dial. I hear from them often, and you saw probably the release they put out. They were not happy about this. So as I've committed to them, I'll commit to the mayor, and I'll commit to the rest of you. We are going to look at this creatively. I think it's easy often to say the state, it's just this thing that makes decisions and isn't very flexible. I'll tell you that Assistant Secretary Rupstello, who for WSF, and our Chief of Staff, and the 9 of us who are directors, we're not like that. We try to default to yes, and Assistant Secretary Rupstello and I have talked about this several times about how she wants to do this, and you know, we're going to look at what we can do and then be very transparent and open, and if hopefully we get to a yes, but if it's a no, it won't be a, you know, we'll show you the reasons and what we looked at. Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Hubick.
Thank you. Hi, John. So good to see you. Welcome to Anacortes. Sorry, I'm not there to speak to you in person with my other hat on. A couple of quick questions, if you don't mind. So remind us, if you would, please. So when people get charged ferry fees for riding on the ferry, what's the word for that? Is that fare box recovery?
Yep.
What was the route in the before time, like in 2018, 2019, that had the highest fare box recovery?
Year round, it would be Seattle Bainbridge.
Okay. How well did the Sydney Anacortes run do?
Sydney Anacortes is actually a moneymaker in the summer. It doesn't make as much in the shoulder seasons, in the spring and the fall, but it's definitely a revenue generator in the summer.
Okay, and so the money that comes from that fare box recovery, where does that money go?
So I think most, I get in trouble saying this to a council, but most transit agencies, I think, have a 25 or 30% fare box recovery. We, pre-pandemic, were directed by the legislature to get 75 to 80% of our operating costs from fare box recovery. So that means our customers were paying 75 to 80% of operating. And it's important to point out that there's a little bit of capital, but nearly 100% of capital, like for $200 million new boats, is paid for by the taxpayers. That's not part of that fare box recovery, but our operating costs are.
Okay, that's helpful. And just one other quick question. So the workforce development and workforce retention and stabilization, that came out of the 2022 supplemental budget, right?
It did, with great gratitude from my colleagues and me.
Is there anything in the brand new 2023 budget, since we're at the start of the biennium, that perhaps some of your city council members could talk to their state legislators about that could be related to this?
As a state employee, I would never advocate for or lobby that anyone contact legislators, but the governor's budget is is terrific and supportive of our programs.
Okay, okay. It was just one of the things that I wanted to kind of mention as we start discussing how helpful it is to keep our ferry workforce there 365 days a year. Just like you said at the start of your presentation, people would leave and find new jobs. And so you would lose that cycle of trained workers. So just making it, clear to everyone else on council who may not spend, days and weeks on end like we do looking at the budget, what to look for, what to communicate to their elected officials about if they so wish.
Yeah, and Councilmember Hubick, I want to thank you for, long before you were in this role, you were in a role of communicating with me about, constituents in this area and their frustrations and sometimes their appreciation for WSF. So I appreciate that. And next, I think at the end of this week, we will see the March revenue forecast. So every year, the state, or several times a year, a couple times a year, the state gets revenue forecasts. So this week, we'll learn how much money there is in the transportation budget that the transportation committees can spend across the state. So, they've been working hard, as you know, and your boss, Representative Rammel, is on the House Transportation Committee, Senator Lovelitz on the Senate Transportation Committee, and I know Representative Lakanoff pays close attention to it as well. So we're about to find out how much they have to spend across the board, and that's when they can start filling in the puzzle pieces for us and other groups, including Washington State Patrol, on how much money there is to fund everything that we're all asking for.
Any other questions from the council? And maybe if you didn't get your question asked, maybe take one or two questions from the public. All right, I think council did a pretty good job of asking all the hard questions.
And I filibustered, so.
Do we have somebody? Yeah, come on up.
Michael Painter, Anacortes. My question would be, how cost effective is it that we are repairing some of the vessels and adding the hybrid technology to them only 5 years before we gain new vessels that are already hybrids? New ones? Yeah, so I'm just wondering, is that the best approach when those vessels, you said, only have maybe a decade or more left on their lifespan?
Sorry, so I might have misspoken. The life expectancy of our vessels is 60 years. The 3 that are going to be converted are coming up on their 20-year. So they would have to have their propulsion upgrades done anyway. And so we thought, seeing we were going through the hybridization, it made sense if we were going to have to replace their propulsion system that we did that. So they would actually get another 4 decades of service out. You're welcome.
All right. All right. Anyone else? Well, thank you, John. Appreciate you coming, and I know it's not always fun bearing the bad news, but thank you for the information. Okay, we are going to move on to item 6B, which is interlocal agreement for the Thompson Trail Trestle and Causeway replacement design funding from Washington State Department of Natural Resources. This is an action item, and this is a Mr. Lunsford action item.
I'm going to leave this photo up because it's pretty. Council members, Mayor Miller. So folks in town know that we just replaced the damaged part of the trestle caused by the fire. So that has been repaired. We're going to have a ribbon cutting on Friday, March 31st at 2 o'clock at the Fidalgo Bay Resort. The Samish Indian Nation has offered that up kindly for us to do that there. This money is for a different project. So it's looking at the long-term replacement of the entire trestle and the majority of the causeway back to Weaverling Spit. The idea there is to improve the health of Fidalgo Bay. So this is only a planning grant. We applied for a grant in 2019 through the Recreation Conservation Office. We were funded, but we have to provide a match. And so this money is part of that match. So the department, the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, would like to give us $10,000 plus some staff time as part of their match. We're also going to be bringing to you a couple more interlocals with Samish Indian Nation, as they have been awarded money for the match, as has Skagit County through the Department of Ecology. So you'll be seeing those in the future. So our match is coming to work on this grant. You will have the ability to look at this feasibility study when it's done in a couple of years, to then talk about if we want to take next steps. So this is a very planned approach to look at what's going to take to get us to about 10-15% design for the replacement, and then let you as a council discuss this in front of the public if you'd like us to apply for other grants to look at moving it down to, say, 35% or 60%, et cetera, for the planning stages of this project. So this is just a feasibility study. That's what you're being asked to vote on tonight. It's just the matching for this already awarded feasibility grant from the state. Any questions to clarify that? Any questions about the specific item?
Questions for Mr. Lunsford?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
I think this is relatively straightforward, but there are a lot of moving pieces. The upside of that is it demonstrates how many different parties are interested in the health of Fidalgo Bay. And this is, if we are to pursue it, to be a very large project, on the order of $10 million. And it'll be certainly more the longer we wait. And I certainly appreciate the Parks Department's enthusiasm for this project, because for a number of years we didn't make movements toward replacement. We suffer for that, especially in availability of funds. Coming out of the 2008 recession, there was a lot of money potentially available that went by us. But there's this money, there's the other set of money that Samish has acquired, there's the match, there's the ecology grant, there's a lot of money out there still. And so all of these pieces, I think, are going to come together just like the pieces are coming together for Mount Vernon's library project, just like it's certainly possible for the pieces to come together for the Guimas Channel Trail. So I move approval of the interlocal cooperative agreement as presented.
Second.
All right. Can I get a motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Ms. Hubick to approve to authorize the execution of the interlocal cooperation agreement between the City of Anacortes and Washington State Department of Natural Resources? Any additional discussion? Mr. Francia, could you take a vote, please?
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Ms. Hubick?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. We're on to item 6C. This is a stormwater program update. Whenever you're ready, Dan, you are on, but I didn't give you enough time to load the presentation.
It's okay. I got it ready earlier. So, good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the public. It's my honor to present to you the 2023 update to the Stormwater Program. Now, the full name of this presentation should be the 2023 Stormwater Management Program Plan and Fidalgo North Stormwater Management Action Plan. It's far too long to fit on the agenda, but that's what we're going to cover tonight. So I'm here to talk about our annual update to our Stormwater Management Program, and then introduce the draft of the Fidalgo North Stormwater Management Action Plan, which is a requirement of our stormwater permit. So I'll start with our stormwater management and then finish out with the action plan. So our stormwater management program aids in compliance with our municipal stormwater permit. I've covered the permit requirements pretty extensively in past presentations. So this time I wanted to focus more on our accomplishments, our upcoming projects, and all of the collaborations that make it happen. This is also an opportunity for public comment on both plans. So the city is under a municipal stormwater permit that's administered by the Department of Ecology. This list contains the minimum requirements for our stormwater management program. Each item on the list has its own set of requirements for the city. It ranges everything from long-range planning to spill response activities, from development regulations to stormwater inspection activities. The permit prescribes a pretty comprehensive stormwater program, and there will be more to come in the next permit cycle, which will start in 2024. It is a lot of work, and my favorite slide shows how we get it done. I show this slide every year, but really it's because this is the heart of the stormwater program. And collaboration really is the theme that you're going to see throughout this whole presentation. Permit compliance is housed in the Stormwater Division, but meeting the requirements is spread across the entire city. Now, there's been one really important change to this slide since last year. Last year, that circle in the middle said Stormwater Program Manager. 1 week ago today, we doubled in size from 1 to 2. And we welcomed Aaron Esterholt to the city as our stormwater inspector. He comes to us with 10 years in municipal stormwater, so he's got a great background, and he'll be running our source control program and taking over the site plan review responsibilities. But with this diagram, it really is an entire city process to meet all these requirements. I work with engineering on permitting, design, and construction of storm infrastructure. I work with our building inspectors to ensure that erosion control measures are sufficient on construction sites. I work with the city attorney on code amendments. All the collaboration that we have, both internal and external, really is the key to our stormwater management program successes. So I'll do a quick run through of how we're meeting our permit requirements. Education and outreach is a huge part of the stormwater program. People want to do the right thing if they know what it is. And the more our residents learn about stormwater, the more likely they are to take the appropriate steps at home or at work or get involved in stormwater issues. So we've done a lot of work in partnership with the tribes and with local organizations, and it's been really valuable. COVID really impacted our education and outreach activities. But I'm happy to report that in 2022, it was business as usual. We resumed tabling at community events like the Waterfront Festival and the Energy Fair. We offered a full roster of classes again, just with the addition of this time, instead of only being in person, they were in person and there were online options for people who are unable to travel, so we could reach a wider variety of people. We're part of a regional education and outreach group, and that's where that collaboration comes in again. We partner with the other Skagit area MPDS stormwater permittees and the Skagit Conservation District, and by pooling our resources and working together, we can really provide a much wider variety of classes. So it includes a watershed master's program, a natural yard care short course. We do an annual workshop on detention pond maintenance. It's aimed at HOAs and industrial parks that have their own privately owned storm ponds. And just starting this spring, we're resuming watershed presentations in our schools, which has been on hold through all of COVID. We've also added a few events recently. Stormwater was represented at the Science at Work night at Island View Elementary. And this spring, I'll be partnering with the Skagit Watershed Council and the Skagit Conservation District for a special stormwater and rain garden curriculum that's connected to the new rain garden in the drop-off loop at Mount Erie Elementary. And that's the picture there on the right-hand side. It was from the planting party that we did. This is a great example of all of our local partners coming together to make something happen. This rain garden was constructed in the spring of 2022, and it was a partnership between the city, the school district, Holly Frontier, the Northwest Straits Foundation, the Skagit Marine Resources Committee, and Azusa Plant Nursery. All of us came together to make this great facility where we can teach students and their families about rain gardens and how they function. You'll hear a little more about that in a couple weeks during the Public Works update. For mapping requirements, the city was ahead of the game on this one. When our mapping permit mapping requirements under our permit came out, we had already met them because our GIS division, ahead of the game. We've got a program that includes all of the stormwater infrastructure, all of the streams, the wetlands, all the components that are helpful to be able to view when you're looking at water quality as a whole. But these maps also include information on development and land use and zoning, which aids in understanding potential pollutants that may be entering the storm system. Our GIS division also oversees the Cartograph Asset Management Program, which allows for really detailed information on our assets like catch basins and storm pipes, as well as inspection and maintenance activities. So staff can access this information in the field and update it in real time. As an added bonus, the GIS department has been working with stormwater to adapt Cartograph to use for our source control program. So that's significant savings to the city because we're not purchasing software to implement to run this program. So illicit discharges, that's anything going into a storm drain that isn't rain, and a few very short list of allowable discharges. We've put in a lot of work about getting the word out about what is an illicit discharge. Where do I report it if I think there's something going on? We've had regular advertisements in the Anacortes American and in A-Town is Our Town, done outreach at community events. We've got materials on hand at the library and City Hall. And I've done a lot of talking with staff and talking with community members. We added online reporting for spills, so you have options other than having to call the spill hotline. And we now have that online reporting connected to See-Click-Fix, so you can report any suspected illicit discharges that way as well. And all of that work has paid off. In 2019, the city received 9 reports of illicit discharges. In 2022, we received 47. I do not think that there has been an uptick in spills, but there has been a huge uptick in people knowing what the problem is and where to go with it. So that I consider that a huge success, because if we can clean these spills before they hit their waterways, it's better for all the parties involved. So this coming year, we're looking to do a rewrite of our IDDE manual and update our spill response protocols and our enforcement mechanisms. Controlling runoff is really important. The things that we allow to be built here in the city are going to be here for decades, so it's really important that we get it right up front. Our site plan review process verifies the permit applications meet all of our stormwater requirements. We have inspection processes to make sure that erosion control practices are in place and maintained so that no dirty water is leaving construction sites. And we have inspection to confirm that permanent stormwater infrastructure is being built properly. When this infrastructure is going to be privately owned at the close of the project, we require a BMP maintenance agreement to ensure that the property owners and the tenants maintain that storm system in good working order. So these responsibilities are split between building and engineering, depending on the project size and type. In 2022, the council adopted the 2019 Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington, which updated our stormwater requirements for design and construction. Aaron, our new stormwater inspector, will be taking over site plan review, which previously had been divided between employees. So this will be good because it'll give one point of contact for the public, and he'll be available for customer service at the planning counter. Our city would fall apart without our operations and maintenance division quickly. They've been a huge part of spill response, both in reporting and taking care of it, cleaning it up, dealing with these things before it gets into our surface waters. They're my eyes and ears in the field, and they're out there during heavy rainstorms, monitoring our storm system, making sure everything's functioning as designed. But even when we're outside of these rainy times, they're busy maintaining and repairing our storm system. We have over 4,300 catch basins and manholes, and they clean all of them on a 2-year cycle. They keep our pipes and ditches clear to allow for water movement, and they help out with facility inspections and maintenance of our storm ponds and vaults. But another thing that is very deeply ingrained in stormwater management that really gets looked over a lot is street sweeping. We have over 130 miles of streets, and our operations and maintenance department maintains those. Often street sweeping is thought of as being, for road safety and aesthetics, but it's actually a really critical part of stormwater programs. Everything that the street sweeper picks up, whether it's dirt, pollutants, cigarette butts, that's all pollution that now is not going to get washed into our waterways. A great example of that is 6-PPD quinone, which has made the news just in the last couple years. It's a byproduct from tire preservatives, and it's present in tire wear particles, and it is highly, highly lethal to coho salmon. Street sweeping is an easy way to help protect these aquatic species. Obviously, streets are where you're going to get the most accumulation of these tire wear particles. The Department of Ecology has released their draft permit language for the next permit, and there's an emphasis on increased street sweeping. And so in 2023, we'll be exploring opportunities to improve our street sweeping program. Source control was another new requirement under our current permit cycle, and Council passed Ordinance 4023 last year, which amended our city code to support the source control program. Source control really is about preventing and reducing pollution on site at these businesses. It's much more effective to remove the contaminants at the source than trying to clean it out of the water later. So we'll be working with local businesses to reduce pollution. And a lot of it is really simple best management practices like dumpster maintenance, appropriate chemical storage, and cleaning practices that don't impact the storm system. So those inspections will be starting as soon as Aaron is fully trained, which will be pretty shortly. And the emphasis on this program is really about education and technical assistance for our businesses. The final permit requirement is stormwater planning. And the goal of stormwater planning is really to ensure that stormwater management needs are a part of the planning process. A big piece of that is requiring low impact development on new development and redevelopment projects. But another big piece in this current permit cycle is the submission of a stormwater management action plan for a high priority storm basin. So the city has selected Fidalgo North, which you can see on the screen in blue. And our Stormwater Management Action Plan, or SMAP for short, provides a framework for water quality improvements in this basin. And it's a series of actions and strategies that can benefit stormwater and water quality in general. We wrote our SMAP in-house. Most jurisdictions farmed it out to a consultant, but we saved a ton of money by doing it in-house, and we were able to do that again because of that great communication between departments. I met across multiple departments and divisions to talk about the parts of the SMAP that were relevant to each department. Everyone gave me great ideas, important background information that I should know. They reviewed draft documents, and the upshot of that is not only did we save money, but we have an action plan that we can actually put into action instead of letting it collect dust somewhere. So Fidalgo North was the area that we chose. It encompasses about 525 acres. The upper reaches contains a lot of the Heart Lake section of the Anacortes Community Forest lands. Downstream areas includes residential, commercial, marine mixed use, and industrial areas. Our permit really specified the process for how we went about choosing our basin, and some of the items that really bumped Fidalgo North to the top of the list were the receiving waters is Fidalgo Bay, which is a Department of Natural Resources aquatic reserve, so it's considered a high-value protected waterway. There was a community involvement process as part of this selection, and what really came through was that our community wanted to see commercial and industrial land uses as a high priority to address, and the Fidalgo North contains significant commercial and industrial zones. Environmental justice is a really important part of stormwater management programs. This basin also includes the neighborhoods in town that have been identified as high risk for overburdened communities and households living below the poverty level. Fidalgo Bay has extensive eelgrass beds, which are vital to marine ecosystems. They provide important habitat for forage fish, for juvenile salmon and Dungeness crabs, and eelgrass beds are really vulnerable to the pollutants found in stormwater. And also, Fidalgo North has 3 streams that have potential for riparian restoration projects. So contained within that, they wanted to see a couple of different action plans. First being capital projects. Our proposed projects range from $60,000 to $1.8 million. It's a mixture of improvement of traditional pipe and catch basin infrastructure and riparian restoration projects. So we have 3 projects that include upgrading undersized conveyance systems and adding water quality treatment into that. And then 3 of them that are stream restoration projects, one on each of the significant streams in Fidalgo North. Then they wanted to have us look at land management strategies. And what they were really looking for was zoning and land use policies that protect water quality and retain native vegetation. First and foremost, they wanted identification of lands that could be protected or conserved. We were already ahead of the game on that because we have 153 acres of the community forest lands in our basin that is all protected from development and logging. Then they said in the case of largely built out areas, which is the rest of the basin, they wanted us to look at efforts to increase canopy cover and to improve these riparian areas. So under riparian restoration, we've got the capital projects from the previous slide. GIS was able to identify vacant parcels that are close to these critical areas, which are surface waters, our streams, our wetlands, that we could prioritize for native plantings. And we're looking at outreach to property owners in those same buffer areas and exploring the possibility of some kind of incentives for native plantings or increased canopy cover on these properties. For long-range planning, we're in the process of updating our shoreline master program, and once that update is complete, that'll include stricter stormwater and pollution prevention regulations. The draft permit language for the next permit includes tree canopy cover requirements. We figured this would be a good time to update the Anacortes Municipal Code on tree preservation and also update our stormwater comp plan. The final action was taking our existing stormwater management program and tailoring it to the needs of the basin. The way that we are proposing to do that is increase screening for illicit discharges in the Fidalgo North Basin, ramping up video inspection of our storm lines. Operations has set a goal of doing 5,000 linear feet per year in the Fidalgo North Basin, as well as increased maintenance and increased street sweeping in the basin. Source control can prioritize inspections in that area, and we're looking at expanded outreach even to businesses that do not fall under the source control program. And under education and outreach, additional signage and outreach to property owners that live near the critical areas. So I asked for short-term and long-term actions. A lot of our long-term plans are going to be impacted by the successes and the lessons learned in the short term, but we'll review this map as part of our annual update every year and then amend the entire plan with each permit cycle, which is a 5-year cycle, to incorporate all the new permit requirements. For budget, we're looking at grant opportunities, as many local partnerships as we can find, and some of the projects can fall under our capital facilities plan. So that wraps things up for my presentation. It was a lot of information since I had 2 separate plans, but I am ready to answer questions and provide an opportunity for public comment.
Thanks, Ms. Hennebert. So it is open for public comment. Maybe I'll check the audience first. Yeah, we got two folks that want to come on up.
Good evening. My name's Marlene Finley. I live in Anacortes, and I'm the president of Evergreen Islands. And I really want to commend the staff for their good work on the stormwater plan and the Fidalgo North Stormwater Management Action Plan. And speaking of collaboration as a theme, we've been talking with staff about the potential of doing some work with Happy Valley Stream, which is one of the streams listed. And we learned from Diane about the concept of a stormwater park. And we're very interested in being a partner. We think this is very important how we manage stormwater and surface water. Yesterday there was a forum, a climate resilience forum here in Anacortes with the Skagit Climate Science Consortium. Those are the scientists working here in our area on climate change and on the data and some solutions for the future and for the present. And stormwater and surface water flow was really important, I learned yesterday. And I think that what you're hearing about tonight's really important for our resilience as we adapt to climate change here in Anacortes. So thanks to staff and thanks for the opportunity to comment this evening.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm Pat Gardner. It was a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot. My question is, again, with development within the city limits, MJB properties or other developments, on plants, greenery, things to filter the runoff before it gets into the bay, besides drains, other things that are surface water, make sure developers provide the proper growth to help with the runoff throughout the city or into the bay, because especially MJB properties being so close to the water right there, keeping that protected. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else before I turn it over to council? I need to check online. 0. Council, questions, comments? Ms. Moulton, and then Mr. Young.
Thank you. I just want to thank you, Ms. Henneber. It's always inspirational to hear about all of the interdepartmental cooperation and communication and the excellence in preparing this plan, particularly the Fidalgo North plan, because it's actionable. We can see it. We know what's happening. And this is just really great information to share. Also, your relationships that you've cultivated with public agencies and Friends of Skagit Beaches, among others that are listed, and how important that is. And this is just such a good example of staff excellence and ability to communicate with council and the community, and it does us all a great service. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mayor Miller. Just really to echo the sentiment of council that it really was a wonderful presentation. The work that you've been doing and partnering through all of the departments and groups, stakeholders, have been wonderful. It really has. And just have a couple of, even though it's a little separate from this, but kind of wanted to put it out. I love the idea of the online reporting and other opportunities for people, if you see something, say something, sort of, and because it protects and helps all of us. It really does. And to be willing to come forward is so important as well, because, you know, without that, you know, the standards or the norms that we're trying to set for what we're hoping for all of us is just going to get lost in the shuffle of it all. Also, I think, forgive me, but I've been seeing, people are sometimes less responsible with their dog poop than they should be. And, and I think in some ways we have to sort of continue to raise the alarm about what it means more than just breaking down on the soil, but it means far more than that, and it's affecting the waters out there that we're worrying about. Any analysis of the common threads that we're finding? Meaning, sometimes I think there were some municipalities that were sort of testing water, and they could see the growth of COVID in the medicines that were in there. I was just wondering because my thought is that if we could sort of begin to identify some of the major pieces, that it may be easier for us, you, or whoever to sort of mitigate where they may come from, and then take appropriate steps to sort of do that. And last thing is, and I know you'll answer that, but speaking to the education and outreach, that's happening out there, I just love that because, it allows us to relearn what we may not have paid as much attention to in our prior lives, but how important it is now because we're at a point in climate change and our system and the health and the beauty of this wonderful city and area we live in. How do we preserve it? How do we restore it where we can? So one of the things is also about the eelgrass and the eel beds. I spoke with, I used to serve on one of the committees for the refinery, the liaison between the community, and they've always been said to be very willing to work with eelgrass restoration if someone were to ask. And so I'm only putting that out to you, and I would love to talk with you further about it offline. Okay? So thank you.
I'd definitely like to follow up on the eelgrass with you. I also sit on the Skagit Marine Resources Committee as a representative for Anacortes, and that is something they are very interested in as well. For the sampling, because I was trying to keep this presentation from being 45 minutes long, another partnership that has been really helpful is with Friends of Skagit Beaches. They're citizen volunteers that monitor city outfalls. And so they were able to get a grant for sampling equipment, and they share all of that sampling data with me. So that's been really useful for me to get information. They monitor about, I think it was 45 city outfalls. They're revamping the program now to do more intensive monitoring of the city outfalls where we're more likely to see something out of the ordinary. But as a result of all of their hard work and their willingness to partner with the city, we've had some great successes. They were seeing, weird things in a ditch, and they were able to find an industrial facility that needed to tighten up their storm system, and that improved things, but still wasn't where it should be. They found an illegal dump site that was hidden behind shrubs on private property of 56 gallons of automotive oil fluid, some of which were leaking or tipped over. So then we're able to get that cleaned up. They added in E. coli sampling this year. They've got like a little incubator so they can do just tests at home, and notified me when they found high hits at one of our outfalls, and we discovered a house that had its sanitary sewer plumbed into our storm system. So now that's been cleaned up, and so the work that they're doing gives us really useful information moving forward to track down problems in our storm system, and it's another one of the great partnerships that we have in our community.
Mr. Walters.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hennebert. Great work as always. I do think it is worth highlighting the work of volunteers who are culturing E. coli at home from our samples. I want to call council's attention, though, to the projects that are in the Fidalgo North plan. Ace of Hearts, Rotary Park stream restoration is something that we added, maybe not particularly this project, but a similar project we added to our capital facilities plan maybe 10 years ago. That park could definitely use the help simply from the park aspect, but certainly the water quality aspect is one of the reasons that we added it to the capital facilities plan way back then. I'd love to move that forward into our capital facilities plan on a schedule sooner rather than later. But also the conveyance projects, especially the two that upgrade existing undersized storm drainage. Depending on exactly which basin these are serving, these projects, through the city's investment, can enable more development of infill housing in the basins that those conveyance systems serve. And since that is one of our biggest goals, is to be able to to provide affordable housing to people, that's largely going to be provided through infill, through missing middle housing. And these basins are ones that would be served by these conveyance systems. You can't build housing or any structure if you can't convey the stormwater away from the site. And a lot of our soils aren't conducive to infiltration. And so these are not insubstantial numbers. I mean, one of those projects is $1.8 million, but it's an important investment that, even though at the end of the day the pipe is underground and you can't really see the smaller pipe versus the larger pipe we would install, it would have a significant impact. And when these projects come forward to us at the time of capital facilities plan development, it will be helpful, I think, to emphasize some of those effects. You know, how many new units could be constructed as a result of this upsizing, or what other numeric metrics can you bring forward to articulate the value of these projects?
Definitely include that.
Thank you. Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. To Mr. Walters' point also, that came up at the Skagit Climate Consortium event yesterday. If we could, we have the numbers of what it will cost us, but do we have the numbers of what it would cost us to do nothing, or the cost of inaction, and how hard it is to quantify that information? But I agree with Mr. Walters that that's a really important part of it that we don't always look at. We're just looking at, we're writing this check, but the larger effects. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So I'll just follow up with Mr. Young's public service announcement. Please be a good human, clean up after your pets. And also, I know you're the happiest person to have Aaron on board, but we're all happy to have Aaron on board the team. So again, appreciate council adding that into the budget and finally making that happen, because we see there's a lot of good work that's happening here, and we know that there's more work to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we are on to item 6D, which is Resolution 3116, waiving the competitive bidding requirements for the purchase of a wastewater treatment plant secondary clarifier drive units. And this is going to be Mr. Walker.
Mayor, Council, thank you. I'll keep this as short as possible. This is, I'm here to introduce resolution number 3116 to waive the...
A little bit closer, Brian. Yeah,
to waive the competitive bidding requirements for a pair of clarifier drives we need. These are, the city has 2 secondary clarifiers at their wastewater treatment plant. They are Evoqua clarifiers, and they require Evoqua drives. They are past their design service life by about 10 years. Your wastewater crew has done a fantastic job of maintaining these for longevity, but their lateral and axial tolerances are kind of at their limit. And since this is equipment that we cannot operate without, the goal is to replace these this year. Like I said, they're Evoqua drives. Evoqua is the only replacement for them, so it's a sole source resolution. The goal, firstly, is to acquire the drives. The amount is for $109,180.80, which includes tax and shipping. And the budgeted amount for this was $110,000. So firstly, the goal is to acquire them, and then the secondary goal will also be to get them installed this year.
Yeah, thank you for, I know the first question would be asked, why the sole source? And then you're leading into the next item, which was the contract award. But first up is the resolution for waiving the competitive bidding requirements. Council, any questions for Mr. Walker? Any motions, perhaps?
Sure, Mayor Miller.
Yep.
I move that Resolution 3116 be approved, authorizing the purchase of 2 secondary clarifier drive units from Evoqua Water Technologies for installation at the wastewater treatment plant, and waiving the competitive bidding requirement due to a single source of supply.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Moulton and a second by Mr. McDougall to approve Resolution 3116, waiving the competitive bidding requirements for the purchase of wastewater treatment plant secondary clarified drive units. Any additional discussion? All right, Mr. Franciac, take the vote, please.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Mr. Carter.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, and the second part to complete the deal is the item 6E, the contract award.
And the contract award is for Evoqua for $109,180.80.
All right,
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
So I guess the resolution that we just did didn't, despite the title, didn't quite actually authorize the purchase. It authorized the sole source purchase. Here we are to authorize the purchase. And I just love the secondary clarifier drive units. So I move that we authorize a contract 23102 SCW 001 in the amount of $109,180.80 as presented.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Ms. Hubick to authorize contract award for the purchase of wastewater treatment plant secondary clarifier drive, contract number 23102 SEW 001, $109,180.80. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Mr. Carter.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, the last item, final item on the agenda is item 6F. This is a discussion item, open for public comment, amending the qualifications for the utility discount program. And Mr. Hoagland is going to be presenting. Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the audience. I'm happy to be bringing this for council discussion tonight. We've been talking about this at the staff and committee level for a number of months now. So I prepared a few slides, and I apologize for not getting this into the council packet ahead of time, but I suspect we'll be talking about this again in the coming weeks. And of course, this will be available for council and the public after this meeting. So I'll run through the current program as it currently stands. So we have a program that was established in 1984 that provides a 20% discount to all of our utilities. And the requirements for qualifying for that discount is to be to have an income level no more than 150% of the federal poverty rate. So for 2022, you can see it's outlined in red here. That amount for a family of 4 is $41,625. For a household of 1 is just over $20,000. Okay, also the current program, customers can apply at any time. It does run through May 31st. That's actually one of the reasons I was hoping to get this in front of council soon, tonight, and hopefully get this done relatively quickly. We would like to try and maintain that same time frame that we've used in the past, where we start notifying customers in the April and May time frame to get the program reestablished, or the applicants reestablished in June. Currently, as of last week, we had 55 customers who are on the utility billing discount program. That number, as I said, it fluctuates because people can apply and drop off at any time, sell their house, move out of their house, they would drop off the program. The average discount, if they use about 600 cubic feet of water, which is an average amount, that discount would be $29.30 per month, making a couple of other assumptions, such as a 21-gallon refuse container and no organics and no fiber service. This is how that breaks down, the current program that is. So 600 cubic feet of water, 21-gallon refuse, no organics, no fiber. This is what the base rates are for our utilities. If there is 600 cubic feet of water consumption, that would generate $16.61 water consumption charge and $21.14 in sewer consumption charges for a total bill of $146.51. So that current discount of 20% would generate a $29.30 discount. With our current 55 customers, that generates about $1,611 in customer savings that the utilities are not collecting in revenue, and that works out to just over $19,000 on an annual basis. So the amounts that are in place currently are not material, the revenue amounts not material to the utilities. So this is the proposed program. One of the changes that the committee, we've been talking about this at the HACS committee, one of the changes that we've talked about making is converting from 150% of the federal poverty rate to the median family income, or the household average median family income, HAMFI, as published by HUD. So this is the 2022 income guidelines. And there are three categories that we've talked about, or I'm sorry, there's two income categories that we've talked about capturing in the HUD data that would be eligible for this discount, and that would be the extremely low income, which is up to a family of four. I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me, but it's around, I think, $26,000 a year. That'd be the extremely low income. The very low income is a family of four would be making no more than $43,050 a year. So the extremely low and very low categories are both captured in these income levels here. So this is just kind of how we prove the data from HUD. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but when you look at the categories here, these are the income levels that HUD provided. Less than 30% of the HAMFI, a total of 695 customers. They have the breakdown of owners versus renters in this information as well. 30 to 50%, 675, 50 to 80, 1,175, 80 to 100, 755, and then over 100% of the average median family income, 4,090. So a total of 7,390 households that we're talking about. In our utility billing system, we have 7,544 accounts in both the residential and multifamily accounts, which the difference is only 154. Pretty close data. It gives us a lot of confidence in the demographics that we're talking about here. I wanted to show the difference here in the income guidelines between what we're currently using, the 150% of the federal poverty rate, which is this category over here, this box on the right. You can see a family size of one, or a household size of one. 150% of the federal poverty rate is $20,385. When you see that same household size of one under the HUD categories, or the AMFI categories, it's $30,150 per year, so nearly $10,000 more per year. So it's easier for these smaller sized households to qualify for a discount under these AMFI guidelines. A household of two at $34,000 versus $27,000. You can see at a household of four, it's $43,000 versus $41,000. So very, very close. And then above that, family size of five and beyond, the 150% of the federal poverty rate actually provides a higher income level. We have much fewer applications at that level than we do below. Probably 95% of our applications are a one or two person household. Very few above that four-person household. So this is the change that we were talking about. So bear with me a little bit. I know there's a lot going on in this chart, but the income thresholds here, this is again, based on a 4-person household, and this would be the extremely low income level. So $27,750 would be less than 30% of the average family median income. Up to $43,050, that would be no more than 50% of the median family income. So those two categories, again, topping out for a family of 4 at $43,050, would be eligible to receive a 30% discount on their utility bill. So the same sample bill that we've been talking about at $146.51, 30% discount would provide a $43.95 discount. So the monthly and annual revenues, the way that would stack up, remember before, the example I was using is 55 families at a 20%. So this is basing, the monthly and annual revenues is basing the calculations on 1,370 households. So that's the total number of households that HUD identifies as extremely low or very low income in the city of Anacortes. Obviously, we don't know exactly how many of those would apply. It seems to me, based on the HUD data, we have more than 55 households in Anacortes that would qualify, but yet that's all we have applying for the discount at this point. But based on worst case scenario, total number eligible, that would generate $60,000 a month in savings to the utility customers, and that works out to a $722,000 a year revenue discount.
And maybe before you go on, just to be clear to the public and then maybe the rest of the council that's seeing these numbers for the first time, these are some proposals that came out of the Housing, Affordability, and Community Services Committee.
Yeah, exactly. Forgive me for moving along so quickly.
That's okay.
We've been looking at this for a period of time in the HACS committee. I know it's a lot to take in for those of you that haven't seen us. Please holler if you have any questions. Happy to field any questions that you have as we're going through this. I wanted to compare this to the annual revenue budgets that we have for each of the utilities. So our 4 utilities, you'll see there's 5 categories here. That's because of the solid waste. We break out the recycling and the solid waste revenues here. But so this total annual impact of $204,000 to the water utility, the way that stacks up against the full revenue budget for 2023 is against $7.1 million revenue budget. It'd be the equivalent of 2.9% of that budget. The storm, it's 3.5%, sewer, 3.8%. Recycling, that works out to 5.6% of the recycling revenue budget and 1.6% of the solid waste operating budget. So in the solid waste budget, we combine both the recycling and the regular operating revenue for solid waste. The reason that's such a difference between those two categories is in the recycling, we only have one option. It costs everybody the same amount of money for recycling. In the solid waste, you could have a 21-gallon, 32-gallon, multiple 32-gallon cans, and all of those options generate different amounts of revenue, and that's why we have, it's a higher revenue number that this discount would be applied against, and that's why the percentage is smaller. So keeping on that same kind of analysis of looking at the total impact, I wanted to show how that would equate to the accounts that were left. So just to go back to this for a second, if I don't believe any of these categories or any of these amounts are material to each of the individual utilities. If at the end of the year I was to look at my water revenue projections and think, I was within 3%, that's pretty close, and I think that's the case. It's not a material difference, but I guess what I would point out is if I was overestimating revenues by 3% every year, eventually it would be an issue. But to to look at it from kind of the short term, at least the first year, once we get an idea of the impact. I don't believe that these amounts are material to the individual utilities. But that being said, I wanted to show what that full impact would be. So if this this total impact of $722,000, if we wanted to make that up all at once against the remaining utility bills, works out to about $10 per month, $10.05, against those remaining utilities. That was the last slide I had, so I know it covered a lot of material. Be happy to answer any questions you might have or try and provide clarity on things that are fuzzy.
Yeah, I know before council gets started, because I appreciate you trying to stand up for your other fellow director who's not here, Mr. Hash, who might have a different opinion about the material nature of a 3% impact on one of the utilities that he's trying to manage. And then I know a lot of this discussion got started with the fact that our CPI increased for the first time for our water utility, if I remember correctly, 8.7%. So I know we've been receiving a number of calls, or your folks have been receiving a number of calls about the increase in our water bill.
Yeah, they were pretty busy for a couple of weeks after that came out.
So anyway, okay, but with that, I know a good opportunity for council.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
Let me add on, first of all, a couple of additional points to describe the proposal. First of all, we, as Mr. Hoagland pointed out, have about 50 households enrolled in our current utility bill discount program. That utility bill discount program was established in 1984. We're currently using 150% of the federal poverty guidelines, but we haven't actually found authority for use of 150% of the federal poverty guidelines. What it appears is we should be using the numbers that were established in 1984. So that's problematic. But if we adopt this new chapter, we can clean that up regardless. The other provision in here that is important is that we would extend this program to organizations like the Family Center and the Housing Authority, because they're specifically called out here, that are providing housing on a rental basis on the multifamily rate to households that are very clearly the least among us, but they're currently eligible for no discount at all, because we don't discount the multifamily rate and we don't discount organizations that are providing that service. This ordinance would also extend the discount automatically without the requirement for anyone to apply to households that are enrolled in the senior property tax exemption program through the county. So if you qualify for the county program, the county would send us a list, we would enroll you in the program, in this program. So there's no dual application. I mean, I appreciate when people understand the difference between city and county government, but not everybody does. And one of our goals, I think, should be to streamline those application processes as much as we can. And that particular process is a state authorized process where we know that they are qualifying based on their disposable income. The other point here is, change from the federal poverty guidelines to the area median income means that the income figures are customized for our area rather than being the federal numbers. And those are also the numbers that we use in a variety of other contexts, including our exemption from impact fees and exemption from connection fees for new construction of housing. And that goes to the fact that your utility costs are part of your housing costs. We know that there is a portion of our community that struggles mightily with housing costs. This will help them with their total housing costs. So that's one of the reasons for the way that we have constructed this program. And then finally, as Mr. Hoagland alluded to, we have had trouble figuring out or reasonably estimating how many people will actually enroll. The HUD figures seem overly high, so we propose a slight increase in the discount from 20 to 30%. And making it across the board. You see a table on page 7 of the ordinance that lists 3 discount amounts, all of which are 30%, so that we can identify how many people actually enroll and then possibly adjust those discounts in the future, depending on revenue and depending on how many people actually enroll and qualify for the program. Currently, we use, I think, W-2s to qualify people. This ordinance specifically says that you must submit your income tax return and testify under penalty of perjury that this is your entire household income. And there are also provisions in here for unenrollment and for penalties if there's any false or misleading statements. So we've tried to cover all the bases. If you look through the document, there's a lot of blue highlighted paragraphs. Those are explanatory text that wouldn't be adopted in the final ordinance, and they include links on page 3 to other jurisdictions' ordinances that we looked at: Bellingham, Chehalis, Edmonds, West Richland, many of whom use the state senior and disabled income tax exemption or property tax exemption program as the basis for enrollment in this program. Finally, we are asking people to increase their property taxes, to vote to increase their property taxes by in excess of $200 a year for the average house. Assuming that happens, this would help mitigate the cost to people, especially those that are on fixed incomes, especially seniors who are the least able to afford escalating property tax rates. So it would help mitigate that cost. Mr. Hoagland points out that it's a 3% or so effect on the utilities budgets. I, for one, am certainly okay with squeezing the utilities budgets because we have authorized whatever rate increases they've wanted in the last 10 years. And we do need to be able to find efficiencies over time. We also raise them with CPI to cover inflation, but they need to be able to, they need to have an incentive to search for efficiency over time, and a 3% squeeze is certainly one that they could endure for a couple of years before we re-look at it and figure out if there needs to be any other more significant changes made.
Mr. Young.
I think this is a wonderful start. It really is. I think it exudes compassion. It also exudes understanding, which, again, in my opinion, I think our world can't have enough of. And but I also think that it does set a wonderful standard for, just sort of making sure that the appropriate people are getting access to the services. And I think in part of our discussion that we had in finance was about, just the cost associated with it. And so I really do appreciate you bringing in those pieces that are necessary to show how much it's going to cost. And as Ms. Moulton said tonight, which is one of my favorite things, is to, when we look at one side of the coin, we also have to look at the cost associated with not implementing it. Most times, sometimes when people do assessments and they look at one side, speaking of cost, they don't look at the cost of not implementing one policy or making the change. And when you really look at it contextually from that standpoint, it really does show the benefit of doing the thing that we do. And so, but I would be remiss if I did not say, and I know Mr. Hoagland and Mr. Walters indicated that this was just sort of brought to and wasn't able to be put in the package. Unfortunate for me, I wasn't able to open the file, and so therefore I just wanted to say, even though I understand the urgency of what we're doing, I totally agree that it's a necessary thing to push forward in order to get it so we can meet the deadlines that we're trying to meet, try and reach those very people that we do. But, again, I will say that I really would love to have it in my hands for review of any documents, whether it's this or anything else, before I come to council. And this doesn't happen often at all. I just wanted to sort of reference this because you guys do a stellar job of making sure that we have exactly what we need when we need it. If there are questions, you always respond appropriately and timely. But I just wanted to bring that point out. Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. Mr. Walters did a great description of kind of our process, and I appreciate Mr. Young's point to the cost of inaction, going back to that. But so the county's priority in spending money on our people in need is to spend money on the people that they consider the most vulnerable, which are people who are already without homes. And it's shown how much more that costs to rehouse people who have lost their homes. And I'm not saying that this program is going to certainly prevent homelessness, but it is going to help people who are in dire financial straits keep their homes. And it is an investment by the city in our people that need it. And it's a very direct, tangible way to help people who are making below 50% of the area median income and who are being increasingly squeezed every day by inflation and expenses and housing prices. So that was also the lens that we were looking at. It costs far less to keep people in their homes than it does to rehouse them. So that's part of the thinking also. So thanks for considering.
Okay, any members of the public want to speak on this issue? Okay, I got a couple of folks. Come on up and state your name, and you know the drill.
Connie Miller, I'm an Anacortes resident, and I just didn't have this information from the packet, so I just want to clarify and make sure I understand the major points. If you don't mind, could I ask a couple of questions from the presenter? It looked like, given the existing discount plan that's in place, I believe your slide said the annual impact was $19,000. Is that correct? Okay, and this new proposed plan would have an annual impact of $722,000? Estimated?
Yeah, that's based on the total number.
Because that's a significant disparity.
On the microphone, go ahead, see
Yeah.
if you... were those your only... I'll let him go there.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
You can go ahead. I have a couple more, but...
Okay.
Yeah, so that first question, I was using the total HUD household estimates for extremely low and very low income families, and that would be if every one of those, 100% of those demographics applied and qualified for the discount. So it's about 1,700 families in those categories, and we currently have, as of last week, 55 families on.
Thank you.
Okay, second question. I understand the importance of changing the metrics to a more local, something that reveals the more local, but this also includes increasing the discount amount from 20% to 30%. Is that correct? Okay, great. And then just one more question, and that is, do you know how many households are estimated not to qualify for this discount? Like what percentage? And am I clear in understanding that you estimate each household will incur an additional cost to cover this discount program of $10.05 per month?
So if you wouldn't mind indulging me for just a moment. So this is looking at the residential accounts that we have in the city of Anacortes, the city utility billing system. There's 7,362 residential accounts. That does not include the multifamily accounts. We have a couple hundred multifamily accounts as well. So if we use that total residential account population against this 1,370 households identified by HUD as either very low or extremely low, that works out to 18.6% of our residential accounts. We wouldn't adjust the rates immediately. This is that $10.05 that was just referenced. So my expectation would not be that we would adjust those rates immediately, but we would monitor for a year or two. I'm we would have, after the first year, a pretty good idea of where we were going, how many people qualified, and what the financial impact to the utilities would be. So we have some time before we need to make any adjustments.
Yeah, it's the best guess estimate of what if everybody took advantage of the program. It's, you know, we've all, well, many of us on council have seen the FCS group come up and talk about rates and how those rates are spread out amongst the users, and this is kind of the best guess
Mayor Miller?
estimate. And yes, Ms. Moulton, but should we get the other questions from the audience?
Sorry,
And
sorry
then
about
I know everybody's really excited about this. This is the first time that the public has seen this. I know the HAS committee has been working on this for weeks now, and but I think we want to get some input from the public. Go ahead, please.
Malcolm McCutcheon here at Anacortes. Earlier in the slide, it mentioned fiber. Is that included, and how are the fiber numbers going to be made up? And in addition, if we're subsidizing fiber, do those areas of the town that do not have access to fiber, will the city be responsible for paying a percentage of their Ziply or Comcast or something like that?
Again, I don't know if we're going to be able to answer all those questions, but if council's going to want to jump in, I'm going to let Ms. Moulton go first, and then Mr. Walters.
Sorry, I'm happy to let Mr. Hoagland answer that question.
Yes, fiber would be, so fiber is currently included in the UB discount program and would be included in this expanded program as well.
Was there another question that you had from before?
I don't want to interrupt the public, but I do have another question.
All right, we'll see if anybody else in the public, and then Mr. Walters after anybody else in the public.
Sorry,
Mr. Walters, or Mr. Hoagland.
Yeah, the second part of the gentleman's question was about making up that difference, and not just in fiber, but in all of those utilities. You know, at the end of the day, there's a balance of expenditures that needs to get paid, and that balance would get made up by the utility payers. If there's a balance that needs to get made up that's not being collected through the utility discount program, or because of the utility discount program, at some point we might need to adjust rates. But with the rate structure that we have, I don't think we would need to do anything immediately. The impact, 3-4% per utility is not significant enough that we would have to do something immediately. We'd be able to monitor for a year or two.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
To go back to the first question about what is the impact of the proposed program, the numbers that we've tried to calculate here are worst case scenario numbers based on the honest data that we got from HUD for how many qualifying households they are. But the qualification levels are actually very close in the median family income data are very close to the 150% figures that we are currently using of the poverty line, at least for the 4-person family, a little further off on a 1-person family. Regardless, we have 50 people enrolled under almost the same metric. So I would be very surprised if we went from 50 to 1,700 with almost the same qualifying metric. So I don't actually think that the income is going to be, or the impact is going to be anywhere near the level that we've projected here, but it could be. And so we have tried to construct a program that makes sense, that provides a benefit, but that is also not going to break the bank. There are other programs that are listed on page 2, some of which offer a 50% discount, some of which offer a 75% discount. We're proposing just 30 to ground truth this program with the MFI data, and then we can adjust it going forward. Everybody's got to reapply every year. There's the opportunity to change it.
I appreciate that input. I sure hope that's the case, but I think it's our job from the executive side of it to run the numbers, worst case, especially when I get comments like I need to squeeze the utilities budget. Because again, I've got to work that, because we've gone through, you know, how we've not maintained our utilities for such a long period of time. We did that FCS study. You know, we're doing the best we can now with that. So we're just trying to be completely open with that. You know, our 3 water main burst just recently. You know, so we have to stay up on that. So I think to get this discussion going, and I know it's going to be ongoing, and we have this May time frame to get. I want to encourage more public input and more discussion on all the pros and cons and understanding the problem that we're trying to solve. So more discussion for
Mayor.
council. Miss somebody else,
Mayor Miller?
because I know that I'm trying to get the rest of the council engaged, because I know the HASC has been all over this topic.
Well, I have a question that I think is germane to the point we're
Please,
discussing right now.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. So I'm not sure if we have this number, but I would really like to see what the mayor's calling the worst case scenario for the existing program. If those 1,400 people who would be, or how many people are eligible now that aren't taking advantage of the program. So then we would have a similar apples to apples kind of comparison. And that might give us a better, because with 55 and then comparing it to, right, the larger number is not really super
I
helpful.
understand. That's fair to get the apples and apples comparison of current. Yep.
Yeah, I would love to have that. I'm not sure I would be able to provide that, though. And the biggest reason, if I'm understanding your question correctly, so this federal poverty threshold of 150% that we're currently using for a 1 and 2 person household is, you know, 20,000 and 27,000 respectively, and under the HAMFI threshold is 30,000 and 34,000. So I don't know how to tell how many, you know, applicants we may have had in 1 or 2 person households that may have applied but exceeded that $20,000 or $27,000 threshold that would actually qualify under the new, you know, the new metrics. If I'm kind of tracking correctly.
Ms. Moulton?
Yeah, so I guess how many would qualify under the old, we don't know how many would qualify under how many would qualify today, thank you, for our current program.
Yeah, I think she's trying to match the number, the 1,200 number or the 1,100 or whatever, 1,200 number of today. I think I understand the question, and we can certainly work on that.
And maybe we can work on that at HACS too.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to, maybe we can touch base offline. I'd be happy to bring that back on Monday.
Great. Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
So the reason you have the trouble estimating that is because we don't know exactly how many households fit into the federal poverty guidelines. We know that for the HUD figures because HUD tells us. But we could also compare it to the original administration proposal, which was to increase the poverty guidelines to 200%. Mm-hmm. And then they would be higher than the area median income for some of the family sizes. I think the key here is that just, although HUD tells us there's these more than 1,000 customers, that we aren't seeing them, and we have doubted quite a bit the accuracy of some of those HUD household calculations. But through playing with the numbers, finally we got the total number to line up kind of almost with our total number of utility accounts.
Yeah, we did. We grappled with this a lot with these household numbers, trying to get that HUD data to reconcile with what we knew we had in the utility billing system, just to try and make sure we were dealing with apples versus apples. Yeah. And I feel like we got there with what we've been looking at.
Well, and then I try to do raw census data, looking at this to try to have some semblance, and it's close, but for going back to what we currently have, it's pretty challenging. All right. Well,
Mayor Miller?
That was Mr. McDougall's. Thank you.
A couple quick questions actually on consumption. Like, would we limit, say, the disposal container? Would you only allow it on the 21 gallon and not allow it, like if somebody is basically using one or more 32 gallons, or would it apply across the board?
Yeah, it would apply across the board. So I guess I was kind of going with the assumption that somebody would try and reduce, that was applying for this program, would try and reduce their utility bill as much as possible. But yeah,
With
it would
smaller
be
container, yeah.
Yeah, it would be applied across the board.
Okay, and same applies to water consumption as well, because we've got these sort of step thresholds. I understand where you get charged more per cubic foot of water after you've exceeded some amount. Would the 30% apply to consumption above, like on those step thresholds, or would we keep it just to the kind of main baseline?
Yeah, no, it would apply to the consumption as well.
All the steps.
So yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I didn't take that into account in any of these calculations. And we also have the winter water use average that would be, that would come into play.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't try to incorporate all those things that obviously will affect the final outcome.
Oh, understood. Yeah, you're definitely just like modeling exercise.
Yeah.
I wonder, I doubt that, I assume a household is going to try to limit their consumption, but at the same time, would it make sense to say, no, the discount does not apply if you're consuming water above a certain threshold?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of question for everyone up here.
Mayor
Mr.
Miller?
Walters?
I'd be open to that, except that I don't know that it would make a whole lot of difference. And one of the things that we were trying to achieve through construction of this is to make it relatively simple for staff to implement, which they emphasized a number of times, which is also why there's only one discounted rate. Ideally, we would have more than one so that you could have a more tailored program. But especially as we are trying it out, it made sense to make it one rate now and see how many people enroll. Also, I think with our water rates, I don't think we actually adopted the steps. I think we've just got the base rate and then an usage rate. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. So maybe it was our last update. We used to have steps as far as the winter water average, but I think we did actually adopt just whatever that average was is what gets applied to the account now. So there isn't a step system. So it's based on the actual, whatever the actual is.
And because the base rate is relatively large compared to the consumption rate, there's already not a lot of incentive to conserve.
I remember that debate well. All right. Well, anything else? I know there's more work to do on this. I think it was a good opening for everybody else that hasn't seen this. So I encourage members of the public, council, to reach out to Mr. Hoagland and for other questions. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, with that, I will adjourn tonight's city council meeting. Thank you very much.